Hello, and welcome to the Community IT Innovators Technology Topics Podcast, where we discuss nonprofit technology, cybersecurity, tech project implementation, strategic planning, and nonprofit IT careers. Find us at communityit.com.
Thank you for joining this Community IT Podcast Part 2. You can find Part 1 in your podcast feed if you subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts.
I'm going to hand it over to our presenters, Johan Hammerstrom, who is the Chief Operating Officer, and Matthew Eshleman, who is the Chief Technology Officer.
All right. Thank you very much, Roshni, and welcome to everyone here joining us this afternoon for the webinar. We're happy to have you with us. Today we'll discuss some sort of concrete budget guidelines, some tangible factors that you can that you want to keep in mind, and that can also be used sort of as a tool for helping you put together an IT budget, which is kind of in some ways, the concrete, deliverable or end result of an IT planning process.
So now that we have gone through, we have our strategic organizational plan, we have our strategic technology plan, we have a good framework of what our policies are in place, we understand how our organization is going to grow, we understand how all of those IT systems are tied together. I think the proverbial rubber meets the road whenever we start talking about the budget. And for the budgeting, I like to use a framework called Run, Grow, Transform. And basically, it means you can divide up your IT budget into these three different categories that really reflect on and touch on different kind of functional areas in the organization. So Run would be, those kind of IT operational expenses, kind of year in, year out, they're fairly consistent. Grow would be those things that provide, perhaps like an incremental improvement, an IT, some type of a migration project, new server upgrade, the cost for a new phone system, something that's going to give you some, additional capacity for your organization. And then finally, transform. And this is a bucket where you can put those, IT projects that, provide significant additional capacity to the organization. So it could be, shifting from, those in-house spreadsheets that you're using to manage your contacts to an organizational CRM. And so now, instead of doing, multiple data entry, you're doing a single, have a single data entry point, you have a single reporting point, you're able to really streamline your business process. What used to take, a week to do, now you can do it in an hour. And so that, shows up in that framework. And so again, the way that this can look in a spreadsheet form is this. You look at your, you have your run, your operational expenses, you have your grow expenses, you have your transform expenses. And I like to look at this over a 5-year period, primarily because you get to see the cost of your initial investment, whether that be, in a new server, a new service, new workstations, new hardware, whatever that may be. But then you also get to see, what does that cost look like whenever it's time to replace those assets, 3, 4, 5 years down the road. Because I think the 3-year budget is great, but I think it has the potential to underestimate the total cost of ownership for some of these major IT system improvements. So and I think particularly as we're doing a lot of comparison between, kind of the traditional capital improvement technology with, minor ongoing costs to, these, lower upfront costs, but perhaps higher ongoing costs, software as a service solution. This can help, potentially level the playing field and give you a better understanding of the IT costs. One thing that this doesn't necessarily do is help to inform, things that you may call business agility, or the ability to kind of quickly respond and react and grow. So this isn't a very fluid or nimble process, but I think it's a good place to start so that 5 years is certainly a long time in IT years. but I think it's a good starting point to help estimate some of those costs moving forward. So again, we can fill this out and have some examples. So as I said, in our run category, well, we know, we're going to need internet, and that's going to be the same thing. And, hey, maybe, we know in year 3, we're going to, make a larger investment because, we're going to have another office that we're going to open up. Same thing, you could look at software costs, your hardware costs. In this case, let's say this is a 10-person organization. They're going to buy 10 new laptops in year 1. So that's at $1,200 a pop, that's a $12,000 expense. Hey, they don't have to spend any money, on that hardware year 2 and 3. But in year 4, it's going to be time to replace those laptops. So there's another $12,000. Same thing, with email. We can see, maybe email, you have that on premise. Maybe that costs you, $1,200 a year for various, support and maybe software licensing. But then in year 2 and 3, that's going to drop, because if we go down into our grow category, we see that we're going to do an Office 365 project, and that's going to allow us to reduce that cost. And so we're going to go from Office 365, we're going to go to Office 365, and then that's going to reduce our email costs moving forward to just the E3 licensing. And again, services, this can be placeholder. And then as you see, we go down into the grow categories. Perhaps there's a website redesign, $20,000 in year 3. And hey, we know this upcoming year we're going to make a big investment in our CRM that's going to fundamentally transform it. We know we're going to have higher expenses ongoing with CRM updates in year 2, but that's going to taper off, year 3 and 4. So this can help you see how a project can, maybe start in the transform or grow area, and then shift into, the run stage as you get into a steady state. So it's just a framework for helping to understand the different technology investments that your organization is going to make, and how those costs add up over time.
Got a quick question from the audience, Matt. A great question from Katie, and she asked, with technology pricing changing so much, how can you estimate 5 years down the road? It's hard for us to know what's going to happen with technology 2 years down the road, or even next year. What level of confidence can you have in the 5-year pricing?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's not realistic perhaps to have your 5-year IT budget dollar-wise be exactly, or the bucket be exactly right. I think there is some sense that your IT budget, and maybe that's not represented here, but the totality of your IT budget is maybe I think it's going to stay more consistent year over year. I think with various N10 reports, they say, or they're showing that an organization's IT budget is around 3 to 6% of their overall revenue, and I think that can help put some parameters around. Maybe the hardware and software costs are going to change, quite a bit, but that may be overtaken by maybe services are going to have an increase. Mm-hmm. So I think it's
The other thing I would add to that is that this should definitely be thought of as a rolling budget. Mm-hmm. So basically, you're redoing this every year, and the chances that when you get to year 5, it's going to look like what you put in the budget 5 years ago is unlikely. But it's kind of like you're walking down a path and it gets foggier, and foggier the farther out you look. But as you walk, it gets clearer as you get closer. And you just kind of want to have a general sense of where you're going, so you don't run off the road, I guess, just analogy, past the breaking point. Do we have time for a quick poll? Just curious. Let's see. Well, we have 2 questions really related to budget. First of all, just want to know if you're currently working on your budget right now. All right, we've got 50-50, and I think maybe the next poll will kind of go along with that first one. So just curious, when your calendar quarter, in what calendar quarter does your budget year start? So are you aligned with the calendar year? You have, does your fiscal year start in July? Does it start, are you on the federal calendar? Do you have an academic calendar year? And some of you may be asking, April? Whose fiscal year starts in April? We actually have a client whose fiscal year starts in April. So we know who they are because they're the only one. But it's possible. In fact, I always thought the fiscal year had to start on the same month as a calendar quarter, but our CFO Bill told me you could pick any month of the year, any day of the year to start your fiscal year on. So that was an eye-opener for me. So we got about a third, with the majority starting in July. So that's probably some of you working on your budget right now for July. Some of you may be starting on your budget already for October in the fourth quarter. And that's another thing I've noticed. I mean, I think the budget process really varies widely from organization to organization, as much as organizations change. One last thing I wanted to mention, the Run, Grow, Transform sort of methodology is one that we got from Donnie Shimamoto, and we've got a link that we'll be posting here to an essay he wrote back in 2011, kind of outlining this approach. And it's just a fantastic, probably one of the best, if not the best, articles I've ever read about IT budgeting. And I always try to check out his sessions at the N10 conference, follow him on Twitter. He's just definitely a thought leader in the world of IT planning and certainly IT budgeting. So thank you, Matt, for putting that up there. And I strongly encourage you all to check that article out because it really goes into much greater detail on the Run, Grow, Transform. And I think another thing I really appreciate about Donnie and his work is that he's a CPA, so he kind of speaks that language. And it goes back to this idea of getting buy-in. And, I don't speak that language, so I struggle a little bit when I'm trying to work with finance staff on budgeting and planning. And I think the more that and all of us can learn to speak that language, the more effective we'll be in putting together, good IT budgets. So we wanted to talk a little bit about some specifics. We're going to get back into a realm that we're more comfortable with here, which is technology itself, and just kind of highlight some of the things that you should be thinking about as you're putting together an IT budget, stuff that sometimes falls through the cracks. You want to do this, Matt?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, so in terms of your network, I mean, the network infrastructure is something that is often in a closet and not thought about. For our planning purposes, we typically this stuff has a 5-year lifespan for us, and then we like to have it replaced. I think in terms of IT planning, we're seeing much more emphasis on good wireless connectivity as organizations have more flexible workspaces. So I think the 5-year on the equipment and definitely a preference for mobility. For servers, again 5-year life cycle on the actual physical equipment itself. Most everything that we're doing now is virtualization if there is a on-site server at all, and we're certainly seeing some preference for moving servers to the cloud, although more often than not that's actually more of a software as a service as opposed to organizations spinning up their own servers in Amazon. Unless you have very specific requirements for having your servers at Amazon, it's you're better off either keeping something on site for kind of the basic connectivity, domain controller login, that kind of thing, and then if you need an email solution, you're just going to be a lot better, a more flexible place to move that to Google Apps or Office 365. So again, a lot of the server stuff is certainly shrinking as the prevalence and kind of quality of solutions in the cloud continues to increase. Questions about switches, 5 years is probably a reasonable estimate. It all depends on the quality. If you're investing in high-end Cisco stuff, 7 years might be reasonable, but 5 years I think is a safe planning bet.
I would add on switches, they go bad in mysterious ways, and when they do, it makes everyone's life miserable. So if you think the switch is basically the device that connects everything together, and if it goes bad, all of your connectivity goes bad. And sometimes they just fail outright, but more often than not, what happens is one or two ports will start acting crazy. And so it's the kind of thing where you may not even notice the problem at first, but then things slowly start to get worse, or it's a strange problem that's hard to troubleshoot. When something happens to a server, you kind of know it right away, and it's kind of obvious what it is, which is not great, but at least it's easy to troubleshoot. But with switches, they kind of lull you into a false sense of security because those lights keep blinking, and half the people in the organization are still getting on the network with no problems. But then you're starting to experience strange problems with other people. So I think as much as generally what I've found is that people are pretty disciplined about replacing their servers on a 5-year cycle, but they tend to kind of let the switches go. And I think it's important to just include the switches on the same cycle.
Great. For workstations, replace every 3 to 5 years. We're seeing, laptops, again, every 3 years. Workstations can usually go a little bit longer. People like to, cascade them down to interns and volunteers. Certainly, budget for e-cycling as well. Here in the DC area, we're very fortunate. There's a lot of different providers that are, competing. So, often you can find somebody who will, come to your office, take the equipment off your hands. You may even get paid a little bit. So it's an easy way to make sure that equipment that may not be meeting, your organization's needs, anymore, can help, cannot end up in the landfill somewhere. I think, what's not necessarily on here is, on budgeting for, as part of your BYOD policy and how that could impact your overall IT spend. One approach to take would be, for example, I saw that Citrix, as part of their BYOD policy, and they gave their staff a choice of, we'll either provide you with a device and we'll support it, or we're going to give you, $2,500, every 3 years, and you can purchase your own. So that was one way that, a very big institution kind of went about, their IT, spend, and so they could, they knew what their internal costs were to buy, support, and maintain, and then they, also made that available for their employees as well.
One thing I would add on the workstations and laptops is, we mentioned here align with your funding, and I think that can be a very effective way to replace workstations, but it can also be a dangerous approach. And this kind of goes back to the value of the Run, Grow, Transform 5-year budget, because oftentimes what can happen is an organization will get a big grant for a lot of machines. They'll replace all of the machines, and basically every machine in the organization will be brand new. And then 5 years down the road, all the machines are now needing to be replaced at the same time, and that grant is no longer there. And so you get to a point where there's just kind of, system-wide failure to some degree of all of the machines in an organization at once. And I think if at all possible, it's definitely more sustainable to put your workstations in the run row and basically replace a quarter of them every year, and so that you're replacing all of them every 4. They have a 4-year lifespan. That can be financially challenging because workstations tend to be, pretty expensive, especially for larger organizations. But I think in terms of long-term sustainability, that approach, then it's kind of guaranteed. It has a guaranteed source of funding from the organization, and you're not in year 6 or 7 with a bunch of workstations that don't work, trying to find grants to replace them. So I realize that's not always possible, but I think if I had to pick a method for funding workstations, I'd definitely, pick a run, annual renew, a quarter of the inventory.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Moving on, we have just about 10 minutes left, and I appreciate the questions that have been coming in. So again, a plug, if you have any questions or comments or kind of best practices that you've picked up, please feel free to chat them in or use the question box. Software, again, you're looking at hosting locally, migrate to the cloud, what are those initial costs, what are the ongoing costs, the routine upgrades, again, your server OS, your Office version, I think we're certainly seeing the trends of things moving from that, capital expense to recurring fee. And, I think that, on the one hand, I think can be helpful for IT budgeting. At the same time, for an organization that's maybe used to getting that big grant, making a big purchase and then not having any IT expenses, it's a difficult shift to, kind of pay for things on that ongoing monthly recurring basis. So, I think this is an area where the IT funding and, needs to evolve and is evolving to pay for that ongoing support and maintenance versus, these kind of big capital purchases from time to time. And, Microsoft with their Office 365 program, the charity program going to, what we're seeing is free for E1 and $5 a month for E3, which is, it's nice. It includes, Office licensing for multiple devices, among some other features. But it's funny at the same time, we'll have organizations say, well, I can buy Office for, $30 from TechSoup. Why would I spend, $60 a year, for the foreseeable future for, to get it as part of Office 365. So, I think those are the decisions that we're seeing more and more often. For backups, the model, if it's on premise, it's likely easy to see and easy to back up. But it's also something as you're moving data out to the cloud, is that hosted service, does it kind of internal backup system meet your business requirements? How easy is it to, recover from, a bad data import or some other type of failure? So it's important, just because your data is in the cloud doesn't necessarily mean that it's, automatically and magically backed up to your expectations. So that's an important thing to identify and plan.
For example, you may or may not know this, but Google, at least when I checked last month, and things changed pretty rapidly at Google, their official policy was that we might be able to recover your data within 5 days. So if you accidentally delete a user account and all the email and files associated with it, if you accidentally delete a bunch of emails, let us know right away. And there's a possibility that if it's within 5 days, we might be able to recover it. Now that's a recovery point objective that and retention time that might not be acceptable to a lot of organizations. So there are a lot of third-party services that have sprung up to kind of address that gap by basically it's another cloud, hosted provider that essentially backs up your Google Apps domain with a much higher retention with specialized tools that allow you to restore in a more granular way. So like Matt said, just because you moved out to the cloud doesn't mean that all your problems have gone away. In fact, to some degree, you need to be more diligent than in the past because, if you have a variety of clouds, let's say on Salesforce and Google Apps, and you have, Razor's Edge hosted, they probably all have different approaches to backup. You need to make sure you know what they are. And if they're not sufficient for your organizational needs, then you need to kind of supplement them with third-party services.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Antivirus, kind of, in the same category, obviously, need to protect the local system. Email and web filtering can also be in that bundle. And I think, there's an area where we see, there's some, synergy, so to speak. If, for example, if you've been paying for Postini with your local Exchange server, now potentially you're moving that to Office 365, well, since you've done your, enterprise architecture and you understand all the things that are tied in, well, now, perhaps you can consolidate and, see if the built-in, anti-spam from Office 365, meets your needs. And if not, you can add on something later. But I think, again, here it's good to understand all the different services that you have in use, understand how they're interrelated, and just make sure that you're not necessarily, paying twice for the same thing if something can already meet your requirements. And then also, back up your passwords. Again, a lot of this is, hosted services. It's important to, make sure that somebody has all the keys to the castle, for all these different services that are in use at your organization.
And I would add that, we're starting to see, as you all know, the nature of IT is changing dramatically right now. Cloud is just kind of one side of it, one manifestation of it. But because it's changing so rapidly, there are a whole lot of new solutions that are starting to emerge. So one of the big areas is cloud brokers. And that's basically, you go to a single a single site, single management console, and it would connect you to all of the different cloud services your organization is using. And that's a great way of kind of managing that. In some cases, it allows you to manage those costs, manage, security credentials. So that's a newly emerging field. I don't think, we certainly don't have any recommendations. I'm not sure how mature that field is yet, but that's coming. And as more organizations and small nonprofits start to host more of their information in the cloud, those sorts of services are going to start becoming more popular and important as well. So keep an eye out for that, and we'll certainly be keeping an eye on it also.
Great. So moving along, understand your ongoing contracts. What's the contract and renewal process? Particularly with a lot of these services. Most things that we're seeing, most ISP related stuff and some phone stuff is a 2 or 3 year purchase with a annual auto renew, or sometimes a 3 year auto renew. It's just kind of all over the map, but it's very important to I think we're moving from IT as a on-premise kind of trust resource to you're purchasing you're basically contracting with somebody to get a service. So the contracting nature of IT, I think, becomes much more important. So reading the fine print on all the contracts and renewals is very critical to understanding your overall IT support and management costs. So we're winding down our time here, but we should have put the people component first, since technology is while it's fun to have all the whiz bang toys, at the end of the day or at the beginning of the day, people are what is going to make it work. So understanding your IT support costs related to your in-house staff, volunteers, your outsourced providers, training, the IT acceptable use policy. These are all components that kind of get rolled into what it means to have an effective IT strategy.
Thank you for joining this Community IT Podcast Part 2. You can find Part 1 in your podcast feed if you subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts.
Community IT does these free webinars and podcasts for our community, and we love sharing our knowledge and experience. If you have more questions or are having trouble with your IT at your nonprofit, please get in touch with us on our website, www.communityit.com, so we can start a conversation or schedule an assessment. Downloading any of our free resources there will get you signed up for our webinar reminders, and you can attend our next webinar in real time and ask our experts your own questions. If you love podcasts, please subscribe and leave us a rating to help others find this leadership resource for nonprofits.